Alrighty, what's up everyone? My name is Night Reacts and welcome back to the channel. As you guys can tell by the thumbnail title, today we are going to be ranking every single Green Day album. Now, fun little fact, this is actually a re-recording because after I did my reaction to Father of All, I instantly did the recording for ranking of all the albums. And honestly, after editing all these videos these past 2 weeks and uploading them and re-listening to the albums, I've came to the conclusion that that ranking video was not that great because my opinions on a lot of those albums changed, some drastically, some not so drastically, some for worse, some for better. So I decided to re-record this and re-rank them. So yeah, other than that, if you're new to the channel, you like what you see, please consider subscribing. It's help our channel a lot. We're actually on the road to 10,000 subscribers and we're very close to it. Also got a mic finally, so that's great. I don't have a stand for the mic, so y'all are just gonna have to deal with me holding it. But other than that, let's just get into this. I'm very excited for this. Alright, so right off the bat, we're starting off with their album 39 and Smooth, and honestly, it's not that great. I mean, what could you possibly expect? It's an album made during a time where they were pretty much just a garage band, had no budget or anything, and it's about what you would expect from a band with no budget playing from the garage. It's a complete mess of an album instrumentally. There's no cohesion throughout the album. It's more like a mixtape than an album. I'm not saying it's a bad album, but it's not an album that I would ever like recommend people listen to unless they just kind of are interested to see what they sounded like with their first album. But it's not an album that I ever would see myself return to, and I don't think I would see anyone really return to. So for that, I'm gonna put it at a mid. Again, I don't think it's a bad album, but I do think the production's very bad on it. There's just no mixing on it. And also one of the biggest issues with this album is the fact that you can't really hear the vocals at all. Like it feels like the instrumentals are very front heavy while the vocals are very buried deep within the actual album itself. Or at least buried deep within the tracks and the instrumentals, so you can't really understand what he's saying 90% of the time. That sucks, but I think this album would sound good live on certain occasions. Like if it's just like a group of 500 people, it would sound amazing live, but I think even in a stadium, I don't think it would sound that great because again, like the energy just has to be there, and I feel like it just has to be like a small closed quarters with very few people just chanting out like the lyrics and having Green Day right up in front of you for it to actually sound great. Yeah, that's what I think about the album. For a debut album, I don't think it's bad, but it's nothing worthwhile and it's nothing to write home about. Right, next up we got Kerplunk, their second album, their sophomore album. Now this album, it's a little bit of a step up from 39 and Smooth, but it's still nothing insane. It still suffers a lot of the same issues as 39 and Smooth, especially when it comes to the vocals feeling like they're buried within the instrumentals and they're not very forefront. I feel like this album is also very all over the place when it comes to the production and mixing and everything, but I will say there are some more interesting songs on here, and I feel like this album kind of displays them kind of trying to find their sound more so than 39 and Smooth. And I do feel like there were some songs on this album that actually felt like very Green Day-ish. So even though I don't think it is a good album per se, I don't think it's a bad album, and again, it's a mid, but it's definitely higher than 39 and Smooth, but not by much. Next up, we got their official debut album, which was Dookie. Now, going into this album, I had so many high expectations because this is an album that is pretty much their highest rated album on AO2i. I'm always hearing amazing things about this album. So going into it, I was so excited. And let's just say I was completely disappointed with this album. I think this album is not much better than Kerplunk or 39 and Smooth. It still suffers through a lot of the same issues, especially when it comes to the vocals being buried within the actual instrumentals and not being able to understand what he's saying half the time. But also, I feel like this album suffers. I feel like all the actual budget for this album went into the singles and none of the rest of the actual album. Feels like they compensated the rest of the album for the smash hits, because the rest of the album, outside of like the hit songs like Basket Case, Welcome to Paradise, and all those other albums, When I Come Around, etc. I feel like the rest of the songs are just filler songs. There's nothing interesting. There's a lot of repetitive chords on there. For the most part, every single song is just the same two chords. For that, I don't think it's a bad album, but yeah, it's not anything special, and I don't think I would really give it any higher than a high mid to almost good, because I will say the hits are hits. The hits are good, but I will say this album is very overrated. Alrighty, next up we got Insomniac. Now, Insomniac, alright, maybe it's because I went in with like a lower expectation than I did with Dookie, but this album was such an upgrade from Dookie, it's not even funny. And I know people are gonna hate me for saying that, but it's the truth. I feel like with this album, even though it doesn't have as many like smash hits like Dookie, I feel like they don't compensate the rest of the album for the hits. I feel like the hits and the just normal songs that were just, not as popular, I feel like quality wise, they're all like equal playing field. Like it doesn't feel like they compensated the rest of the album just for the hits to blow up and to sound the best. And for that, I'm gonna have to give it a good. I really didn't think there was a moment in that album where I was like, this song's kind of, not that interesting or anything like that. Like, I was pretty engaged throughout this whole album, and while I don't think it's, like, an amazing album, and there's definitely far better albums on here, I still think it's a great album, and it's definitely an album I could see myself returning to every once in a while just to see, like, what's changed opinion-wise for me on this album. And plus, there's just a lot of songs on here that are just hitters, not, like, anything insane lyrically or instrumentally stuff, but they're just kind of, like, good damn pop punk songs. Yeah, that's all I gotta say about that one. All right, next up we got Nimrod. Okay, now I just feel like they're starting to really find their sound and they're kind of just upgrading with every album, because this album was great. Like, this album was insanely good. I feel like every issue that previous albums had, they really did not have at all in this album. I feel like almost every single song on this album, like, you can perfectly hear his voice, completely fixed mix like most of the mixing issues. Yeah, there were some songs that were kind of like, they're good but nothing insane, but for the most part, outside of like, I think the middle track, which is an interlude where it sounds very tropical, I feel like outside of that interlude, the rest of the album is like smash hit after hit for me. Like, there's really no song on there that makes me have that sensation to want to skip it. But again, I do feel like that interlude does kind of brings the album to a halt, because it is a long interlude and there's no vocals or anything. It's just like a beachy, tropical, like instrumental for some reason. And then it just continues on into like a normal, heavier pop punk song or like a punk rock song. I don't know why they decided to do that, but when I skip that song and just like take it out of the queue, when I press play the entire album, from front to back, the album is hit after hit, especially when you remove that one song. Other than that, like, it's a great album and I have so much fun listening to it. All right, next up, we got Warning. Now, this album was very confusing for me because it's one of those albums that is like so oddly sandwiched between two very iconic albums, which were Nimrod and American Idiot. And you would think, since it's sandwiched between those two albums, it would be relatively a great album. But honestly, that really wasn't the case, because for some reason, it feels like they completely reverted back to 39 and Smooth with this album. Like, it's a sequel to it. I feel like instrumentally, they just did not know what to do with this album. It feels like they tried to combine like this folk, indie, punk rock. It just feels like they were trying to combine so many different genres of music in this one album that it just left me feeling just kind of underwhelmed throughout it, because I didn't feel like any of the tracks really knew what they wanted to do, and it just left for like a very incohesive listen. For that, I'm gonna have to give it a mid, and I would say it's about on par with Kerplunk for me, because it's about as messy as Kerplunk. Because again, there were some songs on there that were kind of like, oh yeah, these are kind of, they sound like average Green Day songs, but then the rest were like indie punk fusions and folk punk fusions, and also on top of that, don't know why I didn't mention this already. This actually reverts back to one of the main issues I had with like a lot of the older albums, which was the mixing. This album had so many songs on it where I could not understand what he was saying because it felt like they put the instrumentals more forefront than the actual vocals, which is crazy to think about because they didn't do it with Nimrod or Insomniac. So that kind of sucks. But other than that, I don't think it's a bad album, but it's not an album that I would ever return to. And honestly, it's definitely one of those albums that I would tell people, like, if they're going through their entire discography, I would probably tell them to skip it because they're not missing out on anything important because it just doesn't feel like a Green Day album. All right, next up. Next up, we got Green Day, American Idiot. Green Day, American Idiot. All right, I know this might sound, a little bit biased because this also has like a lot of hits on it, but I feel like with this album, they kind of peaked here. Like this album, like really displayed everything that they wanted to do with previous albums, but like done with perfection. Like I feel like this album, they had a story, they had a concept, and they nailed it to a T. Everything that they set their minds to with this album, they did. They did not skip a beat with this album. I think every single song on here is a hit. It has so many iconic songs on here, like American Idiot, which I will say I do think it's a little overrated. I don't think it's the best song on here at all. But it has songs like Holiday, it has songs like Boulevard of Broken Dreams, Wake Me Up When September Ends. It has no issues mixing wise, which thank God. Like I will say, like I do not understand the jump from Warning to this. Like it's so mind-boggling to me. Like just something that really boggles my mind, like the jump between Nimrod to Warning to this album, because it's like they had a great album and then a mid album and then a amazing, almost phenomenal album. Like almost a 10 out of 10 album. Just makes no sense to me. But yeah, this album is just amazing. I absolutely adored this album. But next up, we got 21st Century Breakdown. Now, I will be honest here. I am a little biased with this one because this is one of the albums that I grew up the most with. I did grow up a lot listening to Nimrod and Insomniac too, and some of Dookie and a little bit of American Idiot. But this album was an album that I went out of my way to listen to the most on my own. It has literally my favorite song of all time on it, 21 Guns. And honestly, I feel like it's almost on par with American Idiot. I think instrumentally, this like punk rock opera that they went for with this, like it's just so good. The story was good. It was pretty much almost completely as consistent as American Idiot, outside of like maybe one or two songs that were kind of like they were good, but they were kind of like whatever. It was an absolute blast listening to this album, and I will say I think that he had some of the best vocals on this album compared to the rest of the albums. I feel like this and American Idiot, he had like his best vocals by far. I feel like they kind of peaked with these two albums here. So yeah, another album that's just amazing, and every time I think about it, I just have a huge smile on my face, and it's definitely an album that I've returned to a lot since I've reacted to it. All right. So remember when I said they peaked with 21st Century Breakdown and American Idiot? I wasn't lying, because next up we got the trilogy albums, which consists of Uno, Dos, and Tre. I'm gonna be for real with you. I don't know what the hell they were thinking about with these albums. First off, we got Uno. Uno was a disaster. Imagine like some of the worst parts of every album previously, and then add the fact that it just feels soulless and so corporate at the same time. I really have no choice but to put it at bad. Like instrumentally, there is not a single song really on here that I would go out of my way to listen to. Every single song on here sounds like it was fabricated by their label, and they were like puppeted and forced to sing it against their will. And it's actually crazy the downgrade between the last two albums to this album. I'm not joking. Next up, we got Dos. Now, with Dos, I was like, you know what? Uno was really bad. All they could do is go up from here. There's no way they can get worse than that. I was wrong. I ate my words very badly, because somehow, even though it wasn't by much, they managed to get worse. Like, they managed to get so bad with this album. Like, all the issues with the previous album, Uno, they fully doubled down on it and then some. It is such a corporate mess with these two albums. Instrumentally soulless, vocally soulless, lyrically soulless. There is no energy put into these two albums. None whatsoever. It's like they were dragged out of bed by their label and just forced to just sing. And it actually annoys me so bad, like I don't even know what else to say about this. So next up, we got Trey, which I will admit is the best out the series. It is. I'm not gonna lie. It is the best out the series. By how much? Not a lot. It's still a bad album. It is still a bad album, but I will say it does have some songs on there that kind of show that there is a little bit of Green Day in there. You know, that Green Day is a little bit in there. You know, they're still in there and they're trying to break out, but they just can't. The album is pretty soulless though for the most part, and I do think that there's not a single track on here that is really that great. It's just a really boring album, and it's definitely another album that is very similar to Warning, to where it's just a very messy album and doesn't really know what it wants to do, and it's a very uninteresting album. So yeah, it's definitely an album that I would never tell anyone to go listen to. All right, next up we got Radio Revolution Radio or Radio Revolution. I don't remember. I keep mixing that name up and I don't know why. I think it's Revolution Radio. But honestly, it was pretty damn good. I'm not gonna lie. It was a pretty damn good album. I don't think it was as good as Insomniac, but it was a pretty damn good album. Like, it was a major step up from the Trilogy album because it truly felt like they kind of started getting their footing back in and kind of started like knowing what they wanted to do again. And you could definitely feel a lot more soul in this album compared to the previous Trilogy, which is a big step up and a big plus. Like, I'm so happy that they kind of took control with this album and kind of knew what they wanted to do with this album, because there is kind of like, I don't think like a story, but more like a concept that they went for with this album. And I will say, I think they did a pretty good job with it. Again, big step up from previous albums. And while I don't think it's anything insane, there is a lot of enjoyable songs on here. And there's a lot of songs on here that I would return to. Like, I would actually go on my way and return to, which is a big plus, you know, something that I hadn't had happen for 3 albums. So I'm happy. And then it went all to shits again with Father of All. I don't know what the hell happened. They reverted completely back to Uno, Dos, and Tres with this album. But somehow with this album, it's like they took all the negatives from every single one of their albums and just doubled down on all of it and got rid of all the positives. Like I said that Uno, Dos, and Tres was soulless and corporate. This managed to like expand upon that. And like it really doubled down on the soullessness. Like this album was dog shit. It was so dog shit that I felt offended listening to this the first starting out YouTube back in like 2020. I was so pissed off with this album. I literally stopped listening to Greenleaf for like 3 years until the next album, Saviors, was gonna release. Like, that's how annoyed I was with this album. And now reacting to it 3 or 4 years later? Oh my god, it was just as bad, if not worse. Because I think before I actually gave it like 2 out of 10 or something, or 2 or 3 out of 10. This time I gave it like a 1 out of 10. And that was me being generous, because in all honesty, it deserves a 0. This is by far beyond their worst album. And it's not even funny. Like, it is such a disgrace to the band, and it is such like a stain. It tarnishes their name. Like, Uno, Dos, and Tres are bad, but this like tarnishes their name, because this takes any reputability that they could have had in like the punk scene and just throws it out the window. Like, it is crazy to me how bad this was. But yeah, next up, we got their final album, which is Saviors. Now, this is an album that I didn't actually do a re-reaction to, but I will say I did re-listen to it, and I don't think my opinion has changed on it too much, to be honest. Originally, I think I gave it like a 6.4 and then downgraded it to like a 5.4. Honestly, I don't think it grew on me that much. I would probably give it like a 6. Honestly, it's not a bad album at all, but I do feel like it kind of sucks in a sense of where it has so much potential, this album, but they kind of abandoned it halfway through. Like, my biggest worry when going into this album when it first released was the fact that all like the singles that had came out were amazing. Like, I adored the singles because it felt like Green Day. Like, it felt like old school Green Day, like 2000 Green Day, with like that modern twist to it. But the issue was that all those songs that they released like 6 or 7 songs. They were all in the front. Every single one of the singles that had released were all in the beginning of the album. So when I went into the album, I was so scared because my biggest fear was that this album was going to be completely front heavy, and then the second half of the album was going to be completely full of duds. And that's pretty much what happened. Like, the rest of the album after like I think like the 7th album, it's just boring. Like, it is such a boring album. There is nothing else interesting in the rest of that album. So for that, I really cannot do anything but to give it a mid. Like, I don't think it's a bad album whatsoever, but I don't think it's a good album, and I don't think it's an album that I would return to. Like, hell, I didn't even get the vinyl till recently, and that's because it was on clearance at Target. Like, come on. It was on clearance for $7 at Target when normally it's like $28, $29. No one's buying the album because they know it's a front heavy album. But yeah, it sucks. I kind of had a lot more hope for this album, but yeah, honestly, positive wise, it is a big step up from Father of All, because even though the second half is a completely mid after mid after mid, it's still not bad. You know, I don't think there's genuinely a bad song on here, which is a plus, but I don't think there's enough good songs to where I could put it at good. So yeah, that's my rating and review on that album, which is the final album of this. But yeah, altogether, y'all are probably wondering, what about their best album? What would I say is their best album? Altogether, I would say their best album by far is American Idiot. No joke. Like, you already heard my review on that. You saw how much I was glazing it. It's the truth. I feel like everything they did with this album was pretty much almost perfect. Like, there was every issue that they had with any previous album, non-existent. Like, literally non-existent. There was no moments where there was really any repetitive chords. There was no songs where, like, the voice was, like, buried deep within the instrumentals where you couldn't understand him. Like, it was just genuinely hit after hit after hit after hit, banger after banger. Like, emerald after emerald with, you know, Holiday, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, When September Comes Around. Like, there's just so many amazing and phenomenal songs on this album, and it even still manages to have, like, even like the non-hits are still hits to the point where like the quality of it are still there, you know? Like, they don't sacrifice any quality for any of the tracks. It feels like there's no fillers on this album, which is amazing. I love that. But yeah, that's it, guys. That is my official ranking of every Green Day album. Let me know what you guys thought of this. Honestly, I actually did not mind doing this live stream or this marathon. Even though we didn't really end it off good, ended it off with Father of All, which sucks. I still had a blast doing it, you know, especially going into it like not really recording them back to back to back, and more so just recording them like one a week or like one every few days. It definitely helped for me not to get tired of reacting to them. Honestly, I think the only stressful part really for this whole marathon was just the editing and getting them done quick enough to where I can get them out. And it definitely shows because I by accident misedited like 2 or 3 of them, so they all had like 3 of the videos had like the same intro sequence, and I think they all said day 3 even though there was like day 3, 4, and 5. So yeah, that sucks. But other than that, let me know what you guys think of this. Let me know what you guys would rate all these albums. You know, what's your favorite? Maybe Uno, Dos, and Tres is some of your favorites. Maybe Nimrod's your favorite album from them. Maybe your favorite album is Father of All. I sure hope not, but maybe it is, you know? That's just how opinions work. Let me know how you guys would rank these. Let me know what else I should do. I don't know when the next time I will do a marathon will be. I might take a big break from marathons because these are very stressful for me. But let me know what other artists I should do for a marathon. And yeah, other than that, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Thank you guys for sticking by me for 2 weeks watching all these videos, watching me go through these ups and downs of loving an album and then hating an album and then loving and then being bored and all that. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the post notification bell so you're notified every single time I upload. Make sure you guys go check out my social media links will be in the description, and make sure you guys go check out my Discord server. Links will also be in the description. I'm going to be active on there a lot more, and it's a cool little community and it's fun. We talk a lot about music, shows, stuff like that, and a lot of cool people there. Other than that, hope you guys have an amazing day, night, evening, wherever you are, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.
I make it look effortless. I make it look effortless. Tell you what, I don't need to preface it. I'm filling my cup, but it's still half empty. I feel like a pessimist. She thinks she in love, but she only half met me. She don't get